Okay, so like from now on, I'm just going to be bullet pointing the source series because of like how long it takes me to write. But yeah, let's get on with the video. So Novia and Irina would end up waking up in a strange room, some strange new environment. They would be confused as to where they were, since it looked like somebody's house, but they weren't exactly sure who it was. Their memories would come back to them quickly though. Once their memories had flooded back, they'd realize that the whole religion had seemingly been a lie. They would struggle to comprehend the fact of the matter was, well, it was true. That's something that they just couldn't really comprehend at the time. They would struggle to believe it. Irina would especially reject this thought more than Zenobia. Zenobia would be deathly silent here. Irina would point out the fact that there was a strange mic around Zenobia's neck though, after she had been debating in her mind whether to believe Asia's words or not, especially with the fact Kokubio had also confirmed it, a former fallen angel leader. So it seemed kind of strange. She would point out the fact that there seemed to be something off with Zenobia, and Zenobia as well would end up mentioning the fact that, well, it was the same for Irina. She was about to actually point that out before Irina mentioned her own as well. They would find this to be strange and realize that maybe there was something up with it. Maybe this was Issei doing again. Zenobia would remark that they would probably end up seeing one of the fallen angels. Zenobia would end up remarking about the fact that this might have something to do with Issei, especially once they saw one of the fallen angels controlled by Issei pass by. They would realize something right then and there. After they had fainted, Issei must have done something to them. The last thing they remembered after all was, well, the whole thing with Kokubio. And afterwards they had just fainted from absolute shock. But now they were in a completely different area with these mics around their necks. It seemed kind of suspicious, and considering Issei's lineage, they wouldn't doubt the possibility that he had something to do with this. She would begin to just start laughing because of the possibility of what Issei could have done to them. For all they knew, the boy could have actually turned them into devils of his peerage. And some sort of sick joke it would be if it were true. Zenobia would summon his sword in order to repent in the only way she saw fit. Right when she was about to do so, right when the sword approached her neck, she would get electrocuted. She would scream in pain. And Issei's voice would be heard from the seal. He would be explaining how their whole situation had changed. Now they were essentially going to go through probation as new members of his peerage. This probation period would involve them having to do only like the basic of tasks, such as eating, sleeping, and training with these sort of seals around their necks. Try and do anything fishy and they would end up getting electrocuted. He would basically be controlling their movements from now on until he could fully trust them. He had a feeling that they were going to try and do some sort of repentance, something very foolish, in order to escape Issei's control. So he made sure to plan ahead. That's why they had these seals around their necks so tight. It wasn't even as powerful back when he was controlling the fallen angels, but he learned to trust them and he released the seals on them. When it came onto these two, they had the misfortune of having even more powerful seals around them. The only times when they would be able to do anything besides the basics would of course be when the higher ups at the group ended up giving them permission. Beyond that, it would be a foolish move to try anything of the sort, something more drastic, you could say. Issei wouldn't mention the fact that with these new seals he could also control their hormone levels, so he would just keep that to himself for the most part. The only times he would really use it when it was absolutely necessary anyways. Well, not completely true, more so. He would just have it to where the hormone levels wouldn't be a distraction for them any longer. Yuba Luna would be the one to make her presence known to the former worshippers, explaining how she would actually be the one to train the two from now on. She would actually be the second in command as of recently, considering how she was basically the strongest one out of Issei's peerage. She had trained herself for quite a while now. She had made sure that she would continue to be top dog within the house, the only ones outranking her being Lefay and Ingville. And when it came on to Ingville, she felt that she was rapidly approaching her level. Issei obviously was always going to be at the very top. Lefay would have been the second in command, but she didn't want that kind of responsibility, and when it came on to Ingville, she was simply too inexperienced for such responsibility. Yuba Luna would enjoy training the two, since she would be allowed to go full force against these girls. Yuba Luna would make sure not to hold back her words, emotions, or power in order to have it to where these girls wouldn't be able to lay their eyes on a church again after she was done with them. This was going to be her vow. She had absolute resolve here, and when it came on to Issei, he would simply turn a blind eye to most of Yuba Luna's cruel tactics, so long as it produced results and, well, it didn't kill the girls. The second party didn't really have to worry about so much because of the fact, well, Issei was there to help with that. Yuba Luna would have even upgraded her magic during this time to where she could set off small explosions from within someone's body, rupturing their organs. She would use this against the girls whenever they were disobedient, and she would have Issei heal them afterwards. Rinse and repeat. It was cruel but effective. Issei would be too busy dealing with training Inni in the arts of combat and upgrading his boosted gear to the next level after he had realized just how far he had to go before he could be really worthy of bearing the name of Mephisto. He had learned this when he had met Lilith and he had met, well, Valley. Yuba Luna would also use this time as training for herself. She would be perfecting a craft against these girls, using her magic in order to pinpoint different areas of the body to rupture using her explosion magic. And by the end of the month, Issei would have had a checkup on everyone at the house. He would find that Yuba Luna was starting to approach Inni's level of strength, and that the two newest recruits were showing signs of cracking. He liked this very much. He would see that Irina was slipping. She was attempting to keep on to her beliefs, but for some reason, she began to see the peerage in a new light. Zenobia would have completely converted by the end of the next month and turn against Irina thanks to Yuba Luna's influence. Yuba Luna would have ended up convincing Zenobia during this time that Irina seemed to be some sort of heretic, and that she needed to let it be known that Erina needed to change her behavior if she wanted to really find a good place within this house. She wouldn't be able to escape Issei's influence anytime soon, and with this mark around her neck, she wanted it to be released soon as well, if they wanted to have more freedom. By the time of the conference, Zenobia would have been almost completely finished with her development now, and she would have been learning sadism and absolute obedience to Issei during this time. Ingville would finally get to meet Seraphal by the time of the conference, while Yuba Luna would be granted full command of the house due to Issei recognizing her strength during this time. Issei's peerage would be at the meeting, and they would begin to see just how far the gap was in between themselves and the leaders of each faction. Just being around so many strong individuals made Issei begin to sweat, but he would try and keep a calm composure. Issei would see that Sir Zex was at the meeting too, in place of his sister. Lilith would be holding down the fort of the underworld, and she figured that the advisors that she had specifically chosen for this meeting would be good enough to hold the conference, especially with their strength levels. She made sure to get the best of the best advisors for this sort of occasion. If she were there, she felt that it would not go as smoothly. There was a possibility that the other faction leaders would be a bit too intimidated by her presence. After all, she was stronger than her own father, Mephisto, and basically what ended up happening to their leader was the fact that their original one ended up dying because of exhaustion due to him being too weak in the faction war. When it came on to Mephisto, he did not have to worry. He was strong. He had been there since the very beginning. He did not have to worry about being weak. But he had calmed down over the years, over the centuries. He was still strong, but Lilith had surpassed him in strength. To know that was a terrifying thought in most of the faction leaders' minds. So that was why she ended up staying down in the underworld. Right when they were about to sign off on the deal, a female devil would appear in the middle of the conference. She would attempt to attack everyone while their guards were down. This devil would be revealed to be Katarina Leviathan, one of the descendants of the ancient devil. She would glare at Seraphal and question who Issei was. Issei would reveal the fact that she was also a descendant of the ancient devils, specifically the Leviathans. Once Katarina heard the last name, she refused to believe it. She didn't really have much evidence when it came onto Ingville. As far as she was concerned, she was just lying in order to keep some sort of face, try and go on to Katarina's side. As far as she was concerned, she needed to die. She was just as fake as everybody else in this room, and when it came on to Issei, she would have recognized who he was. She would have recognized that he was Lilith's brother and Mephisto's son. She needed to get rid of him as soon as possible as well. He was a threat. Katarina felt as though Mephisto had betrayed them. She felt that Mephisto had betrayed her and all the rest of the ancient devils, and with Lilith, she never did anything to fix that sort of situation. She felt like an outcast in the devil society. She had allowed for the names and roles to be given away to random devils seemingly. Well, It was more so Mephisto was the one to do it, but it was the fact that she had let it stay. Lilith, the current ruler of the underworld, she allowed for these mongrels to stay in power for some reason, when it was her birthright. The fact that she was an ancient devil herself was really messed with Katarina, and even the fact that she helped to bear some of these ancient devils as well. These ancient devils were essentially her children, and yet she refused to give back power to her own children, her own grandchildren. What kind of madness was this? They were literally direct descendants of Lilith, technically. So it felt as though her own grandmother had betrayed them, cut her out of the will, you could say. Katarina would go in and attempt to attack everyone within the room. She would have a whole army of magicians to help the ancient devil descendant, and with several of the people distracted, they wouldn't even notice Rias appearing in the room as well. Issei would be slightly surprised to see Rias here. He would focus on what she was about to do. Rias would have her attention on Gasper though. Gasper would attempt to fight her. Rias would be surprised at Gasper's newfound strength and attempt to convince him to join her once again, but Gasper would snap at Rias though. He pointed out that she was selfish to the very end. Not only was she willing to kill her own husband just because she didn't like the dude, but she didn't even consider the consequences of her actions. Now look at her position now, and all of a sudden she wants to come back and get Gasper? Well, after he had become so strong under his current ruler's authority, it was only because of Issei that he was so strong. Rias had locked him up in a room inside of a box for who knows how long, playing some sort of video game, feeling so isolated, but Issei was the one to give him some sort of social life. Sure, Issei's methods were harsh, but they were effective and he meant well to the very end. Rias, she was just scared of his power because of the fact that he could not control it at the time. So why would he ever go back to her? Why would he ever betray his new master in order to go back to somebody that clearly didn't want him beforehand? Somebody that clearly could not handle his sort of power before. Somebody that couldn't train him, somebody that couldn't nurture him. None of that. Why would he ever go back to such a place? So he would begin to attack Rias. He would overwhelm Rias while Issei would simply watch in amazement. He would summon the fallen angels in order to pin Rias down until after Katarina was taken care of. Right when they were about to kill Katarina though, Azazel ended up getting a message from Lilith. Lilith would request for Katarina's life to be spared here. She wanted to deal with her personally. Rias would be dealt with by Issei, seeing it as a bit of a waste to kill her now. Issei didn't really like Rias, to be honest, but he did find her to be useful in one aspect. She was a Gremory, and the Gremory family, at least this generation anyway, had the power of destruction on their side. It would be a nice power to pass on to the next generation, a direct descendants of Mephisto. Sure, he could probably end up taking, what do you call her? He probably could have taken, well, Rias Gremory's mother as well, but he felt that she was a bit too on the old side. Well, that and the fact that, well, she was technically married as well. she was married to a man. She was married and he didn't really want to get in between that. He didn't want to end up messing some sort of relationships up with this. At least when it came on to Rias, she was basically some sort of murderer. She was a murderer of the sorts by killing her husband right after their marriage. And as she basically committed so many unlawful acts that nobody really cared about what he would do to her afterwards, she was given a death sentence. So if Issei decided to play with her before killing her, or if he decided to give her another sort of sentence, it was nobody's business. So he would inform Sir Zex of the fact that he was going to be taking Rias home with him. He was going to make sure she learned her lesson. And not only this, but Issei wanted the power of destruction to be part of his lineage from now on, alongside having draconic energy within, his offspring. His offspring would have both the power of destruction and draconic energy flowing through their veins. It seemed like some sort of unholy combination that seemed so wrong but so right at the same time. Not only that, but when it came on to Ingvill, she was basically a half devil of the sorts as well. Turned complete devil now. Regardless, they would be able to do so many things. He wanted to make all of his offspring as strong as possible, so of course he would take Rias with him at this point. She would only serve one purpose from here on out. Issei would create a seal for Rias, and the chain would form around her neck as well. Issei would take her home, and he would bring her back to his residence, where Yuba Luna would take care of Rias. She would get healed by Ossia right when she was about an inch of her life. Right when she was within an inch of her life, for the most part. And this was basically what ended up happening to Rias. For the whole afternoon and evening, it would be a rinse and repeat of Yuba Luna basically rupturing her organs until Rias was barely capable of breathing, and Ossia, she would end up being the one to heal her afterwards. With all of this repetition, it would also be some sort of training method for the two other girls, the two peerage members of Issei's peerage. They would essentially be growing their magical power by doing this repetition. Issei would find it to be kinda smart. And this was basically their practice dummy now, and he would make sure to have his fun with her as well during the night, considering this seemed to be something Rias always seemed to want for some reason. As for Irina, throughout this time she would become shut-in, only doing the bare minimum at this point, such as training, eating, and sleeping, with no real life outside of that. Irina was originally making progress, but after the removal of her outlet in the form of Zenobia, she was seemingly progressing backwards. Yuba Luna would grow annoyed with all of this. Eventually, she would be forced to request the possibility of brainwashing the girl, since she hadn't been making as much progress as she had originally hoped, especially after all of this time. Issei would agree to this, and he would request that Irina be brought to him so he could handle it personally. 1 hour later, Irina would be in the brightest of spirits, acting like her original self for the most part, but there would have been a couple of changes. One of these changes being that she had become completely loyal to the children of Mephisto, and the second change would have ended up being that the girl had developed a bit of a taste for blood now. Zenobia would feel strange at first, knowing the fact they had to brainwash her partner in order to have her behave. But on the other hand, well, Erina was being stubborn and she should have seen this coming from a long time ago. So she would have figured that she would get over it in time. The next concern would be the upcoming rating games anyway, so there would be a lot more training from there on out. And there would be a lot more enemies along the road. Issei, he would have begun to start making more of a name for himself and his peerage in the underworld by engaging in multiple rating games. Issei's team, more often than not, would dominate the competition. Lilith, she would have noticed Issei's rising publicity, and she would actually decide to offer him up a position one day. She would offer Issei the opportunity to have his own TV show. Issei would hear the offer and accept, with Lilith getting her cut from the publicity of her brother's show. Lilith would of course be interested in generating more wealth, so she would make sure that Issei would end up getting into even more rating games, even more than usual, against the strongest of opponents, seemingly constantly beating the odds. And she would make sure to also have a rating game against the leading member of the Bale family, or the Bale clan I should say. This one was interesting. He was known to basically only really use his fists, and he was still able to overwhelm the competition. He was incapable of using magic, well, his family kind of magic, but yet he was still able to overwhelm most of his competition. Lilith decided that Issei going up against this guy would be something that would really get the views up. Everybody wanted to see whether or not Issei would be able to beat this sort of guy, this person who was known for being such an incredible fighter to the point where he was practically unbeatable. They wanted to see just how far Issei could go against this guy. If Issei could truly push this guy to his limits, or would Issei also fall victim to defeat at the hands of Bale? After Issei found out who he was going to eventually be fighting, he figured that adjusting to the battle would be appropriate. He would need to make sure not to underestimate his opponent. He needed to make sure that his peerage was going to be strong enough for this matchup. So he would end up having Lefay find the last piece to Excalibur. She would use that last piece, that last fragment, in order to reform the original Excalibur, and they would go through a process of converting it into a sword befitting of devils. From there, Lefay and Issei, they would ponder about who they should give the sword to. And first, originally Issei was thinking that he would just keep the sword for himself, but he figured that on second thought he was already strong enough on his own. He wasn't underestimating his opponent or anything, no. It was more so that he figured that some of his peerage members needed an upgrade in strength as well. He couldn't hog all of the power for himself, especially since this was a team battle. if it was one on one, well, of course Issei would just be willing to keep the sword for himself. But no, he needed to really think about it. And at the end of the day, Issei would decide to go with, well, Zenobia. She seemed to be one of the most efficient sword wielders in all of his peerage. While they were still trying to process who else they could maybe give it to in case Zenobia refused the offer, they would actually hear a knock at the door. Lefay would be the one to actually go grab it. At the door would, well, be Theodora Astaroth. He would have brought up the proposition of making a trade with Issei. Issei would have raised an eyebrow hearing this from this young devil. What could Theodora possibly want from Issei? Apparently, Theodora wanted Asya, and in exchange, he would give Issei one of his peerage members. Lefay would just literally stare blankly at Astaroth, and she would turn to Issei, and she knew that Issei would never trade out any of his peerage members for another unless he saw the other one as more valuable than his current ones. Lefay and the rest of Issei's peerage, well, they had seen the young devil's peerage before, Theodora Astaroth, that is, and they would have realized that although they were admittedly strong, no one within his peerage really even held a candle to even the weakest of Issei's peerage. Asya, she would walk to the front and stretch out her hand. At first, Theodora thought that she was actually going to embrace him, giving him a hug and accepting the offer of a trade, basically forcing Issei to, well, go along with it, unless he wanted to be a bad sport, you could say. Instead, he would get something else. Something that shocked him. He would have gotten a slap to the face. This would have signaled that she rejected the offer. This would have spoken for Issei as well. The whole peerage would just be trying to hold back their laughter when they saw this, but Issei would have seen everything that went down and decided to walk up to Theodora and actually burst out laughing in front of his face, causing for everyone to be unable to contain their own laughter as well. Issei would have slammed the door in Theodora's face. Theodora, he would actually leave in embarrassment, before summoning a magical circle. He would mutter under his breath about how he wished the two ogres killed Issei back then in order for him to not have to go through such embarrassment right now. But then again, he was the son of Mephisto, so it made sense that he was rather strong. It made sense that those two ogres weren't just going to be enough to defeat Issei. So he would be forced to plot out a new way to get his hands on Asya though, and this would involve one of the upcoming rating games. Issei's team, they would be going up against Theodora's own, and during this rating game, the Chaos Brigade would actually interfere. Theodora would reveal that he ended up pledging his allegiance to the Chaos Brigade right then and there. He would end up taking Asya as a hostage. Issei's peerage would find Theodora though, and they would be forced to face off against each other. The fight between Issei and Theodora's peerage, it would honestly not last long. The fight would be almost humiliating in Issei's eyes. due to just how easy it was to take down Theodora's peerage. Irina would be sent to deal with Freed, killing him in the process. Issei would show no mercy to Theodora when pummeling him into the ground for trying to steal Asia. Opposite snakes would make no difference for Theodora here during their fight. Shalba Beelzebub would also appear, attempting to kill Issei via sneak attack, but Issei would see the attack coming and throw Theodora over in Shalba's direction, forcing him back and actually obscuring his vision for a couple of seconds. Issei would order for Annie to actually grant him access to the Diablos dragon god form. She would do so with no hesitation at all, causing for a new transformation to take place. Issei would be in a more majestic armor that was on the more bulky side, you could say. Issei would go on to vaporize Shalba via an infinity blaster. The laser would wear out Issei though, causing him to go unconscious moments later. Most of Issei's peerage would be confused as to what happened. They would actually be more so concerned until Annie calmed them all down, explaining the whole situation with Issei's form that he had just taken. Apparently, Issei could only maintain this form for only so long before the heavy burden of the form would take its toll on him. Currently, he could only hold the form for about 3 minutes. Annie would request that someone carry Issei back home so he could get some proper rest. Annie would relieve everyone by also saying that he would be fine so long as he gets enough time to recover. Asia would be the one to actually carry Issei back home. From there, Issei would wake up feeling weak. He did not regret his decisions at all though, when he saw Asia checking his temperature. Lilith would have gotten a report from some of her advisors about what they had witnessed from Issei, talking about him going into a strange new form that was incredibly powerful. This intrigued Lilith. This probably meant there could be more toy sales if they could get that on recording one day. And she loved her brother and all, but at the same time, she also had to think about making money. Another sort of publicity stunt that they could do though was, have Issei actually go to the Alliance meeting. Lilith figured that this would have also been a great opportunity for Issei to learn about how to conduct himself in front of such prestigious individuals, people from all these different mythologies here, just to make a peace treaty with the devils, fallen angels, and angels themselves. All of these different factions. Issei would have Annie and LeFay actually accompany him to the meeting. While there, Issei would end up being forced to fight Loki though. He had apparently crashed the party, mentioning how he wanted to start Ragnarok as soon as possible. Loki would have brought his army of wolves as well, but Annie and LeFay, they would have been more than enough to actually take down most of these wolves, most of this army. Issei would handle Loki though, and Issei would actually manage to defeat Loki in battle, taking Fenrir as a familiar for LeFay. LeFay would have seen Fenrir like an overgrown puppy and find him to be adorable, petting the wolf. This would have actually caused Issei to sweat drop. He wasn't expecting for her to react that way. Honestly, he thought that this would have kind of scared her a little bit, but then again, he did see her basically cut down like a good amount of wolves, cut down like half an army's worth of wolves with literally no hesitation, so he really did not think about it all that much. He really should have expected for her to have a reaction sort of like this, or to maybe just glare at him. But since she liked it, it was no sweat off his back. Well, however the phrase goes, Irina wouldn't be seen as fit to attend a school, but she would end up using the extra time on her hands to continue training. She would unfortunately not be able to go on the trip to Kyoto alongside Issei, Zenobia, and Inni though. Rainea would have dropped out of school at this point, focusing her priorities on training for the most part. Seraphal would be around Kyoto with Issei's group though, basically as their attendant you could say. She would have just been informing everyone about the political system in this region. She would be treating Issei like a kid at times though, with her doing things like pinching his cheek or using nicknames from when he was a kid. Issei honestly would have just been a flustered mess at this point. His face was red most of the time whenever Seraphal used those names and did such actions, considering the fact that the girls were around him as well, and mainly the fact that they were in public on top of that, so that just made the situation just very awkward for him. But he would just try to push Seraphal off of him most of the time, explaining that he was not the same child that he once was. He's more grown now, you could say. He's even starting to grow chest hair, for crying out loud. But Seraphal, she wouldn't really care. She would eventually let Issei go off on his own, and he would actually be forced to face off against some other yokai while on his trip in Kyoto. He would defeat the yokai, of course, but he would have found out the whole situation regarding their missing leader. Issei would have ended up being the one to actually confront the culprits behind the disappearance of the yokai leader. He would actually manage to defeat almost everybody within the hero faction with relative ease. The only one Issei would find himself having any sort of trouble though against would be Cao Cao. Annie would eventually find Issei in the middle of a fight against Cao Cao, and once Issei noticed her, he would request that she do the action right now, because of the fact that, well, Cao Cao was beginning to get ground against Issei. Cao Cao would have been confused as to what Issei meant by action, and he figured that he should maybe disable her powers right now, but it would have already been too late as Issei began to transform into the Diablos dragon god form once again. This time around it would have been to actually take down Cao Cao. Cao Cao wasn't expecting for such an increase in power so quickly, and next thing you know, Issei would simply overwhelm Cao Cao in a matter of seconds. Cao Cao would have been killed at the hands of Issei at this point. Issei had won against Cao Cao, and the remnants of Cao Cao would of course be his staff, the true Longinus. Issei would look at the staff, and he would understand how dangerous it was. He had heard the legends of it after all. He would request for Seraphal to actually contact Michael so he could probably retrieve the weapon. It made sense that an angel would be able to hold this weapon after all. Hold this Longinus. It only made sense after all. And because of the fact that devils, they would probably be burned alive if they ever tried to wield it. So of course, well, Michael would actually arrive to retrieve the weapon not too long later, and he would actually thank the two for their efforts. Issei would move on to find Yasaka and free her of her, restraints. He would bring her back to the yokai faction from there, and while there, Yasaka would actually attempt to keep the yokai faction within the good graces of the Red Dragon Emperor. Yasaka would offer Issei Kanoi, her daughter, as Issei's familiar, and maybe create a half-sibling for Kunoi as well, the latter being a bit selfish, since Yasaka would admit to becoming lonesome without at least one of her blood with her, and seeing no one else fit to, mate with besides the one who saved her. Issei would accept the offer and leave with the little girl, probably middle school age, as his new familiar. Issei would have taken Kunoi, knowing that the girl held a great amount of potential, considering how competent of a fighter that she already was. When returning home, though, with the little girl riding on Issei's back, the brown-haired boy would be shocked to see Opus inside, stuffing her mouth with sweets. Opus would spot Annie and immediately knock her out. Opus would focus her attention back onto Issei afterward. They would go on to state their desire to move into Issei's home, finding the son of Mephisto to be intriguing, to say the very least. Issei would begin to sweat hearing this. Opus would also mention how she had been wandering around Issei's place for a bit and ended up encountering a redhead. There was something up with their stomach though. It seemed bloated. Opus would request to know why that was the case. After an explanation from Issei, Opus would be interested in producing their own sort of spawn with the boy. Opus would notice that Issei seemed to have some sort of preference, and formed himself to fit said preference mainly to see if they could. Opus would go back into their original form though after the process was done with. Kunoi would go up to Opus though and actually greet the thousands of year old dragon, having a proper introduction and everything. The two would actually begin to get along rather quickly. Issei would go to check on Innie's condition afterward. Innie would have been okay, but she would have also been annoyed with Opus for knocking her out in the first place. But then again, she couldn't really do much against the dragon to begin with. Issei would just be glad that Innie was okay for the most part. That's all he was concerned about. Issei would go on to train for his fight against Bale though. That was the next thing on his mind. He couldn't help but reflect on his most recent experience. He had almost lost against somebody actually. That was something he was not used to be honest. It would take time for Issei and his peerage to get used to Opus living with them. Opus would actually question why Issei trained so hard, trained so intensely. Finding out that Issei had some sort of competition coming up, Opus would request to watch it. Issei would have no issue with it and continue pushing his body to the absolute limit for the upcoming fight. The day of the event, Issei would make sure not to hold back against Bale. Issei would go into his Cardinal Crimson promotion early on in the fight. Bale would be enveloped by Regulus Nemea, forming the Golden Lion armor. Issei and Bale, they would duke it out from there. Issei would constantly be trying to use boosted gear in order to get the advantage on Bale, but the golden armor wearing lad, they would prove to be an opponent that didn't back down easily. The two would continue throwing fists at each other until shockwaves from said punches would begin to affect the stadium. The field would end up getting destroyed in the process, but Issei would have been the one to be found to have been knocked out unconscious, laying in a rubble. This match would have been declared in Bale's favor. Issei had lost, but Issei had grown to respect the man. He respected this man's strength and the fact that he did this all solely with his physical body alone. The fact that he could get so strong was amazing to Issei. He had thought that for so long you needed to have a mix of a strong body and strong magic as well. If you didn't have strong magic, then you could never really be one of the top tiers, but Bale just proved him wrong. So Issei would continue to train even more intensely from there, probably going into the mountains at times. He wouldn't be really all that concerned with school anymore. What he was really concerned about was strength. He needed to become stronger if he ever wanted to reach his goal. But Issei would find out another thing. There was a White Dragon Emperor, his cousin supposedly, and he went by the name Valley Lucifer. Years would pass by and Issei would have become dramatically stronger or drastically stronger than he once was. He had a feeling that he could probably beat Bale at this point. With how much stronger he had become, he had even managed to add more time onto the Diablos form, although it was still incredibly draining, and at most he had managed to add was around 2 minutes to that form. This was also thanks to Ophus's influence with their snakes and all. But Issei, he had a good feeling about this fight. He would go into the fight and immediately start throwing punches at Valley. Valley would use divine dividing in order to halve Issei's strength, but Issei would keep going back up. He would notice that Valley was continuously becoming more difficult as the fight went on, but Issei still had more tricks up his sleeve. The two would continue fighting. 1 punch, 2 punches, or 3 punches at a time. Sometimes Issei would manage to get in one against Valley, while Valley, he would just end up headbutting Issei at times before kicking him into the rubble. Issei would get back up though, and he would try to fight Valley. Valley would try and weave against some of his punches, but Issei would manage to land a couple of blows, even breaking his nose at one point. But nobody would necessarily know how this ended. You see, what ended up happening is that these two would keep going at it. The two would reach their breaking points, and they would end it off with one last punch. Whoever was the one to land this last punch would be the one to win, because the other one wouldn't be able to handle it any longer. Their endurance would have gone out at this point. Their durability, their sacred gears were basically pushed to the absolute limit. They could not continue after this one punch, but whoever landed this punch, that's up to you. You see, I'm just gonna keep this under hush hush. Whoever basically won, it's up to you, really. And whoever won this fight, they would have been the next in line to become the next king of the underworld, as Lilith, well, if something were to ever happen to Lilith, or if she eventually just decided to retire from the role. Who knows? But yeah, that is all Titan Clan. And as you know, shout out to Neptune for basically helping out. I will basically leave the links in the description, yada yada yada. You guys already know the deal. If you like the video, maybe hit the like button, maybe subscribe if you've been rocking with my content for a minute now. Maybe share the videos as well, and leave a comment. Peace.